Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. We got a real doozy of a video for you today. I could not believe this information when I first read it. My jaw nearly hit the floor at the uncanny parallels between what is happening in Ukraine and Russia and what is about to happen between China and the United States. I mean, I could not believe this. This is with reference to the talks between Putin and Xi Jinping today at the East Asia Summit. The writing is right there on the wall for everybody to see. Okay, so just bear with me while I try to explain this situation to you. And maybe you'll be as surprised as me, maybe you won't be surprised at all. Now, we also need to talk about some other things in the news in just a minute as well, and that's with respect to the use of electromagnetic pulse and other non-conventional weapons being deployed in the Ukrainian theater after the CIA director met with their Russian intelligence counterpart in Ankara, Turkey over the weekend. It's looking increasingly more likely that that's what the outcome is going to be. And I hope we can kick this can down the road. Everybody's like, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Man, the more time we have to prepare for what's coming, the better. Just carpe diem every single day right now. You know, do not get burnt out by this stuff because things are escalating in the wrong direction. We also need to talk about bird flu making a jump to humans. We need to talk about Amazon firing thousands of employees and what that means for the coming depression, among other things. But let's just jump into this Biden-Xi Jinping meeting at the East Asia Summit today. I could not believe this appraisal that Biden had of his talks with Putin in July 2021 and how similar it was to what he said today. Let's go back to July 2021 when Putin met with Biden for the last time at the Geneva, I think it was some kind of Geneva summit or something like that. And this is what he said. And recall, just 7 months after that, they went to war. This is what he said. The tone of the entire meeting was good and positive, Biden said, adding that the bottom line is, I told President Putin that we need to have some basic rules of the road that we can all abide by. 7 months later, they go to war. What does he say in response to his meeting with Xi Jinping today? Well, he says, we're going to compete vigorously, but I'm not looking for conflict with China, the president said. I'm looking to manage this competition responsibly, and I want to make sure that every country abides by, drumroll please, the international rules of the road. Anytime Biden says international rules of the road, you can set your watch to it. A war is coming. I mean, think about that. He used the exact same words, but far more aggressive. Notice that in his appraisal of the conversation with Putin, he said the tone of the entire meeting was good and positive. Well, that's a far cry and far more optimistic sounding than we're going to compete vigorously, but I'm not looking for conflict with China. And let's just go back to that statement. I told President Putin that we need to have some basic rules of the road that we can all apply by. Fast forward to today, I want to make sure that every country abides by the international rules of the road. I mean, put that on a t-shirt, guys. Put Biden on a t-shirt, crossing his arms with sunglasses on, with it says the caption, rules of the road, and a nuclear bomb going off in the background. Because that's what this is foretelling. This is it. I mean, I know this is just like an anecdotal, another Biden gaffe. Maybe his ghostwriter forgot that they said the exact same thing after meeting one of their primary adversaries a year ago. But this is what you would expect to see. You would expect to see a high-level meeting between countries, exactly like we've seen today, in the run-up to a conflict. You're always going to have that one final meeting, and I think this was it. I think that a lot of times you're going to do this. You're going to see countries do this for diplomatic purposes on the global stage. Neither the Chinese nor the Americans trust each other at this point. With all the stuff that went on with Pelosi and Taiwan, the Chinese don't trust the Americans as far as they can throw them. They don't care if the North Koreans do a test. Everybody knows what's going on in the back channels. I mean, we have all our formalities, but at that level, everybody knows what's going on. So all the Chinese are trying to do and all the Americans are trying to do is show that, hey, you know, we're being diplomatic. We're not just rushing to war right away, because you don't want to create that image either of some imperious, tyrannical nation, because then every other country is going to be suspicious of your intentions and won't want to align with you when the time comes, when, you know, they actually do engage in a kinetic war. So this is all theatrics, this is all for show. It's for public consumption, and mostly it's just to show other nations that you're not just a rogue state doing your own thing, that you do have some sort of what you would call it, like regard for international law. Okay, so anyways, that I take that as the United States and China are on the brink of war. And recall that there is no nuclear agreements, strategic arms agreements between the Chinese and the Americans, like there is, or there was, between the Russians and the Americans. There's nothing of the sort. And I know a lot of Americans, at least, you know, some of the ones I've talked to have, I shouldn't say a lot, I shouldn't make generalizations, I don't think this is everybody, but many people, possibly even in the US administration, I think that they, let me just see what my battery life is like here. Okay, we're good. I think that they underestimate the Chinese in terms of their technological capability and their strategic acumen. The Chinese know that the United States are full of you-know-what when they come and they say things like, you know, we're not looking for conflict. Yeah, right. You know, they know that that's a load of you-know-what. And they know that the whole strategic ambiguity policy is just a cover to try to contain the Chinese. And the Chinese have been biding their time. They've been enslaving their population to work for next to nothing in these factory cities for many decades now, knowing that eventually it was going to pay off, making cheap disposable products for the American consumer and dumbing us all down by, you know, giving us this endless conveyor belt of cheap crap. While we've grown more entitled and deindustrialized, they've become an industrial powerhouse. And at the flick of a switch, they can turn the factory machines to tank mode, make tanks, make fighter jets, make missiles at the flick of a switch. And if you thought the rise of the Germans in World War II throughout the 30s, in that 4 or 5 years where they built one of the biggest militaries and most powerful militaries the world had ever seen, just wait until the Chinese flick that switch. And it makes me think that maybe the US administration drastically underestimated the Chinese. They don't really underestimate the Russians, but they're underestimating the Chinese. They know what the Russians can do. But I think they actually think the Chinese are kind of naive and dumb. But the Chinese know what they're doing. They wrote The Art of War. The Chinese are taking their licks now, knowing that as soon as we lap you in terms of GDP and all this stuff, the gloves are coming off. There won't be a velvet glove anymore. If you missed the air show that the Chinese just did, where they're showing off their 6th gen fighter jets, you know, people think, oh, they're just copying the Americans. Well, look, when you're the best in your field, everybody's going to copy you, okay, until they rise to your level, and then they're going to innovate beyond that. There's no sense building the wheel again. There's no sense reinventing the wheel. And so that's why they're reverse engineering. That's why they copy what the Americans. Why would you reinvent something when it's right there for you to see? So, of course, the Americans have done all the research and development. So, of course, they're going to steal ideas. And it's really not a matter of that. World War III is more about quantity, less than it is quality. At the end of the day, that's what it's going to be about. And the Chinese are not bound by any strategic arms agreements. So this, to me, signals that the US and China are going to war. Sooner than later. Because again, it was only 7 months from Biden saying that amicable relations between the Russians and the Americans were present to going to war. And now we're seeing an environment of competition that is vigorous, one in which we're not looking for conflict, signaling that they're much closer to conflict. The other thing to keep in mind is that both the Chinese, the Russians, and the United States, and any nation that is engaged in conflict, it's beneficial to that nation and the people who are in power, whether it's Xi Jinping, Biden, or Putin, because having enemies warrants more state spending. It warrants more government spending, but whether it's on the military or whatever the case. So no leader is going to not want some sort of conflict, some sort of external enemy that they can point the finger at, especially if the society starts to become destabilized. They need some kind of scapegoat. So don't think that countries don't benefit, and these leaders, all these leaders involved, don't benefit from that. Now, let's also talk about what's going on the Ukrainian front, because there's some very, very concerning things happening there. I kind of ended on an optimistic tone the other day, saying that maybe it's a sign that there's a bit of a detente between the USA and Russia and Ukraine, and that maybe there was some back channel negotiations made to freeze the conflict in place. I don't really think that anymore, based on some information that I've received. Now, before I do that, I need to talk about some comments that Ron made on our last video with respect to the Denver airport, potential government bunkers under there. And I know that this was, I think I watched an episode of Jesse Ventura Conspiracy Theories like 15 years ago. It was a long time ago where they were talking about that. Now, the reason why I act surprised when Ron talks about it is because hearing from a bunker contractor and hearing with such conviction that these things exist, you know, it's intriguing to me. It's not that it's the first time I've heard of it. Some people were under that impression. No, trust me, guys. If there's something ado with deep underground military bases, I've probably heard about it. What I will say, though, and what people need to understand, is that all of those things were classified, okay? All of the underground bases that are known about now were at one time classified. And the technology exists now to, even if you know the whereabouts of one of these deep underground bunkers, well, that we know historically the government has built in secret. So, and the thing with the Denver airport, it's like in plain sight. You know, it's like that gargoyle. Go watch the video of the Denver airport gargoyle talking to people, joking about how he's working for the Illuminati. It's like, you know, if you ever, there's an old saying, the most obvious is the least obvious. So, you know, you put it in plain sight, you put the Freemasonic symbology on there, you put the murals of, you know, the crazy explosions and people dying and stuff like that in the airport, and it all just seems so nutty, right? But regardless of that, you know, I had somebody message me and say, hey, I worked at the Denver airport for 4 years, and I can tell you that there's nothing down there. That may be the case. You know, with a place like that that's so big and vast, it wouldn't be hard for them to achieve. If there ever was a place where they could do something in secret like that, it would probably be there, especially if you have so much construction going on at the same time. Anyways, my point is that we know the government will do things like that in secret in the past, and to think that they won't do things like that in the future is just our forgetting of history. And this assumption that we're somehow different now and that human nature has changed. It hasn't changed one bit. They probably have a lot new deep underground military facilities that we're just simply not aware of. So regardless of whether or not that's true, you can bet money on it. You're never going to be able to prove this bet until it's declassified. But in 20 years, when they declassify some other underground bunkers, then, you know, you can come back to this video and say, hey, you were right. Of course, we'll probably be long gone by then, the way things are going. I just hope that we can carpe diem, seize the day right now. A lot of people are like, oh, when is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? Look, every day that it doesn't happen is another day to prepare. And I know people are getting kind of burnt out with this stuff, and if you are getting burnt out by it, then just consume some other information for the time being. And, you know, the thing is, in order for us to motivate people to prep, Just like Joel Skousen has said, if you don't motivate people, if you don't communicate the imminence of the situation, nobody will do anything. People will just get complacent and not do anything. So that's why we communicate this with such urgency. Anyways, I just wanted to comment on that. I went on a bit longer than I wanted to. So the CIA director has met with the Russian counterpart in Ankara, Turkey, about apparently some stuff with respect to what's going on in Kherson. They're saying that the purpose of the discussion, or there are rumblings that the purpose of the discussion was to talk about the use of nuclear weapons being unacceptable. Now, it's looking increasingly likely that the Russians may use some kind of electromagnetic pulse weapon, and that they may time it to this winter offensive that they're about to do. And perhaps this higher level meeting had something to do with that, because the United States knows, and this is why it's so naive and dangerous for people to assume that the Russian military isn't good, because really they haven't used their nuclear weapons yet. They haven't used their electromagnetic pulse weapons yet. They haven't used their hypersonic weapons yet. They haven't used a lot of their arsenal. They have 10,000, okay, 10,000 missiles for their S-400 and S-500, which can be used for offensive and defensive purposes. So for us to, get all excited and think that, the end of the war is near and we're just going to push into Crimea and nothing is going to happen. No, the CIA would not be meeting in Ankara if there wasn't something else being discussed along the lines of a potential use of these types of weapons. Because this took place just after the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, had said that they would potentially be using these types of weapons of mass destruction. What is the exact quote? I'll see if I can find it here for you, but leave it to Medvedev to always tell you what Russia really thinks. He says, for the first time, this is just a summary, for the first time, a top Russian official has talked about the use of weapons of mass destruction and admitted that Russia will use them in due time. This is what Dmitry Medvedev said. Russia, for obvious reasons to all reasonable people, has not yet used its entire arsenal of potential means of mass destruction, and it did not hit any potential enemy targets located in settlements. And not just because of our inherent human goodness, he says. Everything has its time. Everything has its time. So they're saying that eventually they're going to use this. And he even goes on to say that, remember that it is Russia today that is shaping the future world order, not states like Britain or Dark Kiev. And this new egalitarian world order will be built. Everything has its time. And they just blew up the Kakhovka Dam. Not really sure who's responsible for that. Probably the Russians, because they wanted to limit the Ukrainians' ability to cross the river. However, some people are saying it was the Ukrainians in an attempt to flood out that region, or perhaps the Russians are trying to flood out the region now that they've left. Who knows what the hell is going on? But we're getting signals here that if Kiev is able to continue to push deeper, even though the Russians are making some gains in the Donbass that all the Russia bros are bragging about, again, it's not about making gains. Clearly, that's the logic and the rationale that they're on about, is that it's not about making geographic gains, it's about how much of the military you can destroy. Because if you can kill enough of the military, even if you've only taken 1% of the country, and that's where all the fighting happened, then you win the rest of the country automatically. And I mean, this is how battles of old were fought. Two armies would meet on a field, they would duke it out, and whoever won basically won the entire country for the most part, because once your army's dead, you're dead. So it's not a battle for land per se, it's how many guys can we kill? That's really what it's all about at the end of the day. So we can't view the map like that, even though the Russia bros will start to cheer when they start pushing them back in the Donbass, which it appears what they're doing, they're starting to make a little bit of headway there. But again, you know, we can't really count that as a win by their own logic that says only deaths count. Only the so-called 9-to-1 kill ratio for Russians to Ukrainians is what counts. So anyways, but some very unsettling footage came out today. A Wagner Group. Wagner Group is like a private company that's the Kremlin gets to do a lot of their dirty work. And these guys are, this is not like propaganda, Western propaganda. This is real. They go out to prisons and they say, hey, if you want your freedom, you're going to fight for us on the front lines. We're going to throw you right into the meat grinder. And if you choose to run away or defect, you're going to get shot or worse. Okay. And worse is what happened to one of the so-called traitors. And they video footaged it. It was an image of a guy getting hit with a sledgehammer. Okay, it's very, very gruesome footage. Now, it's the kind of footage that would make people want to cringe. And a part of me absolutely despises seeing things like that. Like it affects anybody watching something like that in a bad way. There's a part of me also that realizes that a part of preparedness and a part of just preparing for war in general is getting accustomed to seeing things like that. And, you know, the thing is that as much as we might not ever want to have to experience something like that, as much as we don't want to condone it, as much as I take no pleasure in watching something like that, a part of me realizes that if I shy away from watching something like that, I'm also at somewhat of a disadvantage if it becomes a war zone here. And you almost need to expose yourself to the bloody reality of life to understand what you're truly up against in this world. But what that showed for me, and of course the Kremlin has distanced themselves from this, and I'm sure somebody is in trouble for having that video be released. If it's even, unless it's propaganda, who knows what it is. I mean, but it does not look good. This guy was an escaped prisoner. He escaped. He said he was going to go fight for Ukraine and fight against the Russians. So they were trying to make a point to all these other prisoners that they have on the front lines that if you run, this is what's going to happen to you, that we will find you. Because this guy he went to Ukraine somehow. Oh yeah, that's right. When they did the prisoner swap, this guy was returned. So people are upset with the Ukrainians for sending this guy back when they knew what his situation was, okay? Because he wanted to be a prisoner of war for the Ukrainians in the hopes that he could fight against the Russians. So this is the example they made of him. But that's the kind of thing that doesn't look good, okay? And it shows that there's a lot of sick and twisted people on all sides of this conflict, especially the people who are working for private companies. Those are the people, and not everybody's going to agree with what I have to say here, but it's those people who are excited about this kind of stuff that you need to worry about. I'm not talking about the guy who enlists because he wants to serve his country, or the guy who even was drafted, or even somebody who, just, is a respectable military person and is moving up the ranks. The people who work for the private companies who are indemnified against certain reprisals, those are the people you have to worry about. That's where you get the psychopaths. And that's why these guys go out to prisons. And if there is any shady business going on in Ukraine, it's probably these guys who are doing it. I think it's less so the religiously charged, like Chechens. It's probably the Wagner Group mercenaries who are doing it. I'm just going to presume. So there's a lot of Russia bros who give these guys a pass and are always painting them in the prettiest light. And it's not the fact. This is war, and it's ruthless, and it's getting to that point where we're seeing guys done in with sledgehammers. That's a sign that things are getting real bad. Apparently the Russian plan right now is to exhaust Ukraine from the winter. And to basically, perhaps they're going to do this EMP thing, 35% of the grid is down and irreparable, potentially more in the coming weeks ahead. And right now, the Ukrainians are trying to get all this electrical equipment, these transformers, power generators, things like that. Well, where is all this stuff made? A lot of it's made in China. If the grid were to go down, if they start using EMP weapons, it doesn't matter in whose country, it all comes from China right now. And these are big pieces of equipment. And there's no way, like the US military stuff is not even hardened to withstand, modern Russian EMP weapons that are apparently up to 200,000 volts, just coursing through all of the air over a very wide area. I think a lot of military equipment, as far as I'm told, is built to withstand about 50,000 volts, not 200,000. So of the grids, the frail little grids in places like Ukraine are not going to stand a chance if they utilize those types of weapons. And repairing that grid will be a nightmare. It will be an impossibility to get these transformers built. Ukraine has an inflation rate of 25%. They're hoping for another like 60 billion to help with their deficit and all this stuff. Meanwhile, you have African countries who will be lucky to see a $60 billion GDP for many, many decades. Yet for some reason, we're obligated to continue to funnel money into this conflict and not encourage people to go to the negotiating table. Apparently, there are trainloads of armor and NATO military gear heading toward Kaliningrad. That's the exclave where they got a lot of nukes and they got a lot of MiG-31s with Kinzhal nuclear-tipped missiles just waiting to be deployed throughout Europe should the shizzy hits the fizzy. So I regret to inform you that contrary to my assessment the other night that maybe things are diffusing and that this is the calm before the storm, I think the storm is coming, and it's going to be a big one. The demand for private bunkers, on the topic of bunkers, has boosted in Russia by nearly 400% in the past month. Talked about the Wagner stuff. Russians are going to be doing a Soviet-style military education in their schools every year now for 140 hours, I believe. It's going to be geared towards military education. Everything from how to operate Kalashnikovs to how to manage a nuclear attack. This is before they graduate, so I presume that's going to be like in your senior year of high school or something, getting people ready for the coming World War. Absolutely insane. That's going to take effect immediately. Talk briefly about the military advances in the Donbass. I believe it's in the areas of Pavlovka and Bakhmut. These villages located on key crossroads have seen intense fighting in recent weeks. Kiev forces sustained heavy casualties in the battle, according to the Russian military, losing 9 soldiers to 1 Russian. They keep saying that, but I'm really confused at why Russia has withheld their military capabilities for so long. I mean, I understand all of the main ideas that people throw out there, but it's still bewildering to me. Like I said, they blew up that dam. Briefly talked about that. There's people right now who are calling for the Russians to use nuclear weapons. A Russian rally held in Moscow had leaders calling for Russian Vladimir Putin to launch a nuclear strike against Washington, D.C. In the video, a man can be seen leading a crowd of people through the streets of Moscow and chants calling for attacks on Washington. Strike the decision-making centers on Washington. A flight tasked for the Sarmat missile on Washington, etc., etc. So, with this Wagner stuff, you can see that the sentiment against the United States is growing. Perhaps that's what the Russians want. Like, you need a little bit of fire, you need a bit of fuel for that fire. And this is why I say, going back to my comments about how nations need enemies and scapegoats, you need the Reichstag moment. You need the justification to mobilize. You couldn't just mobilize right away out of the blue. You kind of need these things to happen in sequence. Well, looks like my Thing just fell off the thing here. What's going on here? Let's see if we can. I'm using this gimbal, which apparently sucks. There we go. And I only got 5 minutes left to rattle off the rest of this. Okay, bird flu. Now, oh, come on. Let me just hold the phone for the rest of this video. This is going to be ridiculous. Maybe it's overheating or... Let's try it now. There we go. Where's the communist cameraman when you need him? Now it's not working at all. All right, technical difficulties. Okay, this last thing, bird flu. We're just one mutation away from it getting worse. Now, the bird flu has become so pervasive. Apparently, the numbers, the exact numbers, are a 600% increase in cases in the past 3 months in the bird population. Bird flu has jumped to humans in the past, although it's never become transmissible from human to human. But it's becoming increasingly more likely that that may be the case with its omnipresence in the environment. And right now they're locking down all of the chickens, kind of like they locked us down for 2 years. And it makes me wonder where the gain of function research is happening for bird flu, because you know that's probably happening somewhere. And my biggest concern, in light of all of the controversy going on right now, and if any of you guys are paying attention, you know what I'm talking about with respect to the approaches of the last 2 years, the effectiveness of certain things, and this, that, and whatever. Just imagine the low level of public trust that is going to ensue when this next big pandemic comes, which is going to have a much higher fatality rate. I mean, H5N1 was 50% fatality rate. There's some strains of bird flu that are up to 90%. Now, yes, a higher lethality means that it's usually not that, or not as transmissible. There's usually a shorter incubation period. But if there is a situation where you have a long incubating virus that has a high fatality rate, then we're in big trouble, because a lot of people are not going to buy whatever the government is selling next time around because they blew their load too fast. Amazon is going to be firing 10,000 people. 10,000 people. Now, this is still only 3% of their workforce, but if Amazon isn't doing good and the FANG stocks aren't doing good, which they aren't, they're down nearly 50% in the last year alone. Absolutely incredible. That's a sign that recession is on the horizon. I mean, recession is here. Depression is on the horizon. Yeah, so, I mean, what else do you need to know? France is warning of possible blackouts. Michael Schneider, who I believe is a kind of eschatological Christian fundamentalist type, believes that the collapse of everything is here. Food shortages, more conflict, environmental disaster, agricultural disaster, all of that stuff looms on the horizon. What more do you need to know? The X-37B space plane has landed in Florida after a top secret 3-year orbital mission. And we've been talking about this lately because we know that there's a black budget. And we know that they got to have something up their sleeve, at least we hope. But remember, the whole point of a strategic arsenal is to show your cards, so as a deterrent to the other side. And we haven't really shown many cards. All we've said is we've changed a few words in our nuclear doctrine and said, well, maybe we will strike first if we need to. So I know a lot of people are getting a little restless with this stuff, but man, just seize every day you have in the run-up to this thing, because it may be months, it may be years, it may be days. It literally could happen tomorrow that sparks start to fly. But just seize every day and do not get burnt out by this. If you are starting to get burnt out by it, then focus on your long game preps. Focus on self-reliance. Focus on the homesteading aspect of all this. You know, the prepping and the bug out bag and the gear is the stuff you get first, but it's just meant to be a bit of a gateway into the homesteading, self-reliance realm of things. So don't be discouraged, And, you know, definitely do not long for SHDF. Do not romanticize this. Like I say, you know, it's going to be exactly what was depicted in that video, but it's going to be like that everywhere because unfortunately human nature has not changed. That said, I'll leave you on this positive note. 51% of human nature is good, and it's just that 1% that has managed to inch out evil all of these years, and that's why we're here today, and I think that we will prevail. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.